We want to, first of all, on behalf of our Ohio Equity team, we want to welcome you to our first Environmental Justice Speaker Series. The theme of this monthly event is equity as it relates to environmental justice and climate resilience. The Ohio Equity Team is a committee of the Ohio Energy Table with support from REAMP. Our goal is to encourage Black, Indigenous people of color to become more engaged in issues of the environment. We are ecstatic to kick off this series with a phenomenal environmentalist, Heather McTeer Toney, who will be introduced by Tracy Sabetta. Thanks so much for your support.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I do have the privilege today, as Jocelyn mentioned, of introducing our inaugural speaker, Heather McTeer Toney. Heather served as the first African-American, first female, and at age 27, the youngest mayor of Greenville, Mississippi from 2004 to 2012. Known for her energetic and genuine commitment to people, her work has made her a national figure in the area of public service, diversity, and community engagement. These were exactly the characteristics that led to her being appointed by President Barack Obama as the regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency's Southeast region, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Heather is recognized as a national leader in environmental justice. She's appeared on news outlets such as CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and C-SPAN, and she's known to have been seen with Jane Fonda on the steps of the Capitol building during climate actions on Fire Drill Fridays. Heather holds a bachelor's degree from Spelman College in Atlanta, a law degree from the Tulane University School of Law, and she's currently serving as the Environmental Justice Liaison for the Environmental Defense Fund. She served as past president of the National Conference of Black Mayors and is a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. On the personal side, Heather enjoys reading, loves triathlons, which I'll never understand, and I happen to know she's a pretty big football fan. She's married to Dexter Toney, and they have 3 children. I, however, know Heather best as the Moms Clean Air Force National Field Team Director, where I had the distinct honor of working with her on national climate advocacy and local government initiatives. I also watched her demonstrate incredible leadership and compassion as she held our national field team together when it was shaken to its core after the murder of George Floyd and the first protests of May 2020. She gave us all the opportunity and a safe space to share experiences, share grief, fear, and eventually some hope. I will be forever grateful to her for that, and I'm also extremely grateful to her for being with us today. With that, I give you Heather McTeer Toney.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I truly appreciate that introduction. Hello to everyone. And real quick, Tracy, you know, football season is starting. Spring football happened here at Ole Miss just last week. So I'm already ready. I'm already in the mode. I hope everyone is doing well. And I'm so excited and so honored to be here with you. And I'm really thrilled that we're having this conversation. Environmental justice and climate justice have truly become the trend topic of our day and our time, but it has not been without us understanding why it is so important to be authentic in this space. I have seen far too many people just add the words environmental justice or climate justice to the end of their sentences as a way to say that they are doing something in community, when reality and history tells us that that's just not true. So what I'd like to do today as we're starting off this conversation is let's just go back to the beginning and talk about not only how we got here, but the importance of our voice in moving forward. I am a Mississippi Delta native. I was born and raised in Greenville, Mississippi. My parents came to Mississippi as a part of the voters' rights movement. While the rest of my family is from Baltimore, Maryland, and the Carolinas, my brother and I are the 2 that were born in Mississippi because somehow after the 2 years that my parents were supposed to be here, they ended up staying another 45. And so as a result, our roots here are deep, and it is what has shaped me. But it was not until I was much older that I recognized that the environment itself and the climate and everything from people that I knew from my church to my school to my neighbors had something to do with how we were interacting with the environment. People ask me often, how did you get to this space of doing this work? And I say it's remarkable that I did not get there earlier. And the reason was because I never saw myself. When I looked at pictures of environmentalists and what does an activist, a climate activist look like, I never saw pictures of Black people. I saw pictures of white people hugging trees and people saying that we needed to all be vegan. And that just did not gel with my Southern roots of being raised in a First Baptist Pentecostal non-denominational church and having food and picnics on Saturday, on Sunday, and everything that I knew. Yet and still, when I think about how I related to the environment and community, everything was connected to nature. I knew when harvest season was, not because I had studied horticulture or ecology. It was when football season started. It was in the fall. It was when I started to see cotton and soybeans come up. Driving along the roads in Mississippi, my brother and I were able to point out on one side of the road what was a soybean field versus a cotton field before we ever saw white. And it was because we knew when the crop dusters were flying over what time of year it was and what they were doing. But we also did not recognize that these were environmental injustices, that the flagmen that were standing out in the fields were Black people in their slickers that were being sprayed with pesticides on a regular basis. We knew the fear of the Mississippi River because it was not only a few blocks from the house, but also because there's riverboat gambling. We knew that when we could see the tops of the casinos over the levee, it was high water. When we couldn't, it was low. We knew when the floods came, not because we studied an almanac, but because our cousins in Chicago would tell us when it was snowing, and we knew that snow was going to come down river and that the fields and streets of Mississippi and our neighborhoods would eventually be flooded. When I became mayor, we saw it over and over and over again and happening more rapidly. And so while people began to think that Southerners, are not into climate change, the reality was climate change was impacting us quickly, and that we had to reckon with how we would deal with our communities, what we would do to prepare, and how we would make ourselves resilient to what was truly taking place in our world. These are the things that led me to understand how intricately connected climate and environment are to every social justice issue that we're dealing with in our time. There is not a single social issue that we could name that is not directly related to climate. It also underscores the importance of why we have to have these conversations on a regular basis and interweave it for people who may not always get it. So for example, when we dealt with the trial that just took place and got the verdict of the George Floyd tragic murder, one of the questions that was raised from climate activists was, does climate have anything to do with this? How are we seeing, or is there an increase of violent crimes that have taken place? And the statistics have shown us yes. But what's interesting to me is that we have listened to people of color who live in communities that are fraught with this. We would have known this a long time ago. And think about it. I can remember often as a child coming up how my godmother would say, it's getting hot, folks gonna start acting a fool. It was something about the heat. It was something about violent crime that took place as it got warmer. And it was not limited to just violent crimes in place of shootings, but also child abuse, domestic violence, places where we would see incidents that took place because of the warming. There was a study that was done in the New York Times that showed that if we want to look at violence and shootings, we should look at the weather. And it directly correlated how over the past 20 to 30 years, not only have we seen an increase in global warming, but it's also directly related to how historic discriminatory housing policies in the United States have created the heat islands that we now see. Because of the redlining that took place in the 20s and 30s, which created the housing projects that were basically concrete blocks, heat islands in and of themselves were places that were fostering some of the very same problems that we see today. And by not connecting these dots, people were not able to identify and see just how much climate had something to do with their day-to-day interaction. And so understanding these elements is a critical point in understanding how we move forward in terms of equity in environment, in climate, and particularly energy, especially in this new administration. The Biden administration has talked about the onset of a Justice 40. And this really has given me a lot of hope and excitement, because it talks about not only an all of government approach with respect to climate and environment, but also how 40% of the funding should go to marginalized communities, communities of color, and communities directly impacted on the front lines of the climate crisis. The question becomes how? How do we do this? How do we get the money to the people who need it the most? And how do we ensure that these funds are used in a manner that is not only community building, but also resilient? It's so important for us to have deep listening conversations. When I think of deep listening conversations, I think about the fact that all too often, when we talk about climate and environment, we're really quick to go look for the PhD person who has that environmental scientist background. And no offense to anyone who has that, it is extremely valuable, and we need that data and that science. But we also need that mother that lives on the corner that's been there in that same house for the past 2 generations and knows exactly how that neighborhood has shifted, what has happened, who has grown up, who can tell you who in what family has had asthma, whose child has been sick, who has had heart disease. That expertise is just as valuable, because that is true community data at a place that we often miss. And it is so important to understanding how we are going to make real change. When we have these deep listening conversations and are truly inclusive in bringing people to the table, it means that we're talking about how we intersect all of these things together. We cannot talk and tell people that they should grow better food in their communities when they don't own the house or are unable to make a decision about where to plant something. It's great to talk about electric vehicles, and I am all for it. But I'm also going to be the person that tells you we can't just put public transportation and electric vehicles without also giving people an opportunity or showing them how they can own their own vehicle and creating wealth through things like electrification and infrastructure in our communities. So while, yes, I am super excited about seeing school buses, and Tracy knows this with moms, electric school buses going through communities, we should still also be advocating to make sure that the charging stations for those electric school buses are located in the same communities to which they're going through, that the churches on the corners of those communities have those charging stations, that the basketball courts that were at one point in time left to be abandoned are now in a position where we are reclaiming them, and the school bus can park right next to the basketball court, and we can use that electricity there to create Wi-Fi that goes across the whole neighborhood. Because if there's anything that coronavirus showed us, is that there are holes across our country. There are places where we simply don't have access, and we can correct so many of the injustices by providing us access moving forward. These are the reasons why it is so important to have diverse voices at the table, so we can explain what are the issues and the holes within our communities and how to address them. It's called culturally competent solutions. Solutions that make sense, depending upon which space we may go into. I laugh, and you will hear me say all the time and make references to my faith and my upbringing, because those are the things that shape me. And if there's anywhere you're going to hear about the nature and environment, I promise you I learned it in church before I learned it anywhere else. I cannot think of a scripture in my head that in some way does not have something to do with a tree, a river, a brook, a stream. And maybe that's because I was there too much, or I come from that type of family, but whichever way it is, it's one of the ways that I receive and understand the information. If that's how I understand and receive it and see it, how many different ways are there for other communities to do the same? And how many different ways are there for us to explain it in a way that people can receive? So yes, I laugh when I hear that we've got to reduce our meat intake, because I will be the first person to tell you I'm not going to my pastor and tell him we cannot have bacon. Not going to happen, A, because I love it, and B, because I think I would probably get put out of my church. At the same time, there are significant measures that we can go and we can talk and we can teach and we can train and we can share and we can learn, because these are the places that we become, once again, sharing our cultural competencies to resolve some of the solutions, come to some of the solutions that we have sought after for so long. These are the places and times where it's important for us to reckon with both our past and our history in terms of the injustices and what we need to correct, as well as being forward-looking. And that's what I want to think to now. What is the next step? Because as we are thinking through how to make our communities more resilient, how to utilize funding that's coming in and ensure that we're being elevated on a policy side and that there's equity in the policy that we are establishing, we also have to look out and make sure that our children, the next generation, are able to take advantage of the decisions that we are making today. We are literally sitting on the cusp of the next revolution, and that is thrilling to me. This is the time that they felt right before we moved into the Industrial Revolution, right before we jumped into that big innovative bubble of Silicon Valley when all the dot-coms were starting. Green innovation is right there. We're right at that point. It is at this point that we must stop and also ensure that communities of color have access and the same opportunities to take advantage of wealth building at this time. We cannot leave communities of color behind under the guise that we are correcting the problems without putting people in a position to take care of their own communities and create wealth for generations to come. And it's doable. There are amazing examples. One is in Spartanburg, South Carolina, the Regenesis Project. In that project, they were able to take a community that was fraught with Superfund issues, landfill, housing discrimination, and sitting right in the middle of industrial spaces by utilizing a $30,000 EPA workforce development training grant. They trained people in the community to build solar panels. Those solar panels were then leveraged with another grant to redo housing in the community and to not do multifamily dwellings, but to do single family dwellings. And the people who lived in the dwellings were the ones who took the workforce development training so that they were building the things that were going on their own homes. They ended up leveraging that $30,000 into $300 million. And if you look at that community today, you see it is full of not only homes and education, but also healthcare, streets, sidewalks that were not there before, and a community that has a skill set that they are passing on to the next generation. I was so ecstatic when I had the opportunity to visit and partner with Spartanburg on a number of the things they were doing with EPA, because the excitement and the energy was coming right there from the people. They had an opportunity to see a future that even we couldn't see. And that's the power of bringing people to the table. When you have that lady who's been living on the corner in the same house for 2 generations and has seen children come through, she knows better than we ever could what the future of that community can look like. She knows what their potential is. And it's our job to listen and make sure that we have included that voice so that we are not leaving people out. The last thing that I'll say before we get ready to open up and have questions, because I really like engaging. I learn just as much from talking than I do from getting and answering questions, is that we have got to listen to our young people as they lead us and begin to collaborate together. I've been so encouraged seeing the different youth movements that have really taken note of not only where we are, but the opportunities that we have, and pushing us to do better, pushing us to say that we must do better. This is not the time period where we need shy people. This is the time for those to come who won't take no for an answer, who can be overly pushy and are pioneering, because that is what it will take for us to be at a place of a equitable, renewable future. And that's what I believe in. I know, as the hymn goes, that, we were not brought this far just to be left. There is so much that is within us and so many ideas that are possible, that the very idea of an energy revolution, an idea of a just energy revolution is phenomenal. At the same time, we have to be cognizant and not make the same mistakes that we've made in the past. So I encourage, and I'm so excited that you have joined this particular group, that you are sitting in the seat that you're in right now. At Moms Clean Air Force, we have a program where we encourage our members to join boards and commissions. Why? Because that voice in that space is important. Everybody may not want to run for office, but certainly people can serve and be appointed to positions and sit in policy positions where they are making decisions. And no, it does not always have to be something that is environmentally related, because the environment needs to be everywhere. So yes, environmentally minded people should sit on the airport board and should sit on the transportation board and should be a part of the planning commission, not just parks and recreation or the tree board, but in every sector of government, because that is how we are a part of the policy, having a part to play in terms of directing the dollars and planning the future of our communities. And sitting in these boards and commission spaces gives us insight into how not only our colleagues are thinking, but what voices are missing from these tables, and how we need to make sure that we are inclusive and that we are thinking through every aspect of being equitable across our communities. It's beautiful to see how it's done differently in different parts of the country. I know that in the Midwest, one of the things that you all deal with that we don't deal with as much in the South is the cold. While I love to visit Ohio and Michigan and my friends in Illinois, often I do not go up there until after Labor Day. I'm sorry, between Easter and Labor Day. That's like my window. And my husband's family is from Michigan, so that should tell you about how we feel about being warm. So things like making sure that there's temperature controls with your utility companies is important. Why? Because people should not have to deal with whether or not having electricity and heat is a luxury that they could afford to pay for or not. When the temperature gets to a certain level, we shouldn't be talking about whether it's cut off because someone does not have the ability to pay. It's a basic thing that you need to live. And so these are the conversations that, again, you can have reasonably, and it's important to have these conversations for the understanding of what does it mean to live and have justice with respect to equity environment. On the flip side down here, we have to make sure that people have air. Air conditioning is important in Mississippi in the summertime. You do not want to go to a football game in August here, Tracy, but it is still something that we have to understand is important as our planet warms and the things that we have to prepare for. So I'm excited. I'm going to stop there. I know there are obviously questions that I have missed in the chat, but I want to say before we get to the questions, thank you. Thank you so much, because you are serving as an example of what service means with respect to equity, energy, and environment, and we have to do and show more of it.
Oh, Heather, thank you so much for your words. I'm so excited to have you talking with us in Ohio. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad that we finally got there. I'm going to start out with my own question, and I think you covered it a little bit, but just to kind of spark some other questions is, why do you think it took so long for climate change to be seen as an environmental justice issue, and how can we make sure that that's not just the issue of the day?
I think that's a great question, Tracy, because it depends on who is seeing it. Black and brown and indigenous people have known for a long time has been a problem. It was the fact that the main environmental movement did not identify it as a problem. And so even during times of segregation, when we think about going outside, we still have to reckon with the fact that for years, national parks, we couldn't go. There were national parks that clearly said whites only. And so the identification of being environmentally minded was just not something that Black, brown, and indigenous people even had access to. So when we began thinking and talking about environmental racism, environmental injustices, it was because we were constantly being put into places that it was basically a dumping ground. Mustafa Santiago Ali, who was a good friend of mine, phrased this the best way that I can think about it. He said, when we think about enslaved Africans when they were coming over from one continent to another, packed together into a ship, with no air circulation, surrounded by excrement and trash, and you have that image in your head and think about environmental racism and environmental justices and how Black and brown people have been
Heather, we can't hear you right now.
Wait a minute.
There you go. So it went out after.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Yes.
So if you could just kind of like repeat it a little bit after you start talking about the slave ships, and then we'll be right there.
So after we think about the enslavement of Africans and how they came across, what they were in terms of that ship hull, bad air circulation, being surrounded by trash and excrement, and think forward to racist policies that on no part of their own, Black and brown people were put into housing projects or forced to live in spaces where they were next to landfills and trash, or the air pollution being disproportionately worse around communities of color, purely based upon the policies of between how people were valued with respect to the environment, the way that we were seen. And so, Tracy, to answer your question, the reason why it has taken so long is because the mainstream movement never saw Black and brown people as being a part of the movement. And now, because I think equity and justice issues continue to rise to the top, and there has truly been an awakening in our country that's been a long time coming, it's still fraught with adversity. January 6th, a lot of those folks that went and, were rushing the Capitol, they came home to our community. They came home to places where we're still battling some issues. And so this is not over. I think the environmental community as a whole had two things going. Number one, the time clock. The International Panel on Climate Change has only given us a certain amount of time to make significant changes with respect to emissions before we will have no choice about how the weather impacts us. We still have a point to reverse that, but science told us, y'all better figure out.
The sound went back out, Heather. Can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Now you may have to switch back to the computer because we still can't hear you.
No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Maybe we'll switch this out. It may be a little echoey, but I hope you can hear me. I was saying that, I think science told the environmental movement, y'all need to figure out how to work together or else we're all going to hell in a handbasket. So that has been a big press on why I think there's a lot of energy now around find new solutions that work for all of us.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to go to the chat. We have had a couple of questions come in. One, and the question is actually directed for Ohio specific efforts, but maybe if Midwest too, if you wanted to make the region a little bigger. But what are the specific areas where you think Ohio is especially behind efforts in other states, as well as maybe some areas where we could be helpful models for the rest of the region?
I think the fact that first of all, the fact that you're having a equity conversation puts you in some places ahead of our other parts of the country. I saw where there's the Climate Justice Fund that was started here recently out of Columbus, and that's very exciting, because there's funding now putting around actually having conversations and listening. And that's a critical point. Some of the places though, I know y'all have had a lot of energy questions and issues and some really interesting state bills in Ohio. And your legislature is fascinating. So
that's one word for them.
Try to put it nicely. But I think, that's, again, it's another place where you've got this constant battle going on. And if it's better in other places, that's very difficult to say, because everybody's got issues. God knows we have ours in Mississippi the same way that Georgia, and we don't even want to get started on Texas and some of the stuff that's happening there. But what's important is that people within the state begin to recognize the effectiveness they have in this, the voice that they have. I don't have to tell anybody how important it is to make sure that people are turning out to vote. Black and brown people the studies have already shown us they are more likely to vote on climate policies than any other demographic. There have been at least 3 studies that have taken place, 2 before the election and 1 after. And I'm happy to share those, Tracy. I can send them to you if folks want to see them. But time after time, it has been Black and brown people who vote on climate issues. So it's no mistake that when we see voter suppression laws that are coming out, it's not just suppressing people from the right to vote for justice issues, but they're also climate policies that we have to be concerned about. So, there in Ohio, it's just as important that people are recognizing their role in this, and that they are stepping up and that they're speaking out. Again, the energy issues within the state, I try to tell people, don't get so in the weeds, or like some folks would say, you can be so heavenly minded that you're not any earthly good. Let's not get so into the weeds that we, are going at people and telling them, oh my God, did you know we're not using this much renewable energy? Because quite frankly, when you look at when they're looking at their electricity bill, they're looking at the number. What is the amount that's here? Now, when we're talking to people about how to reduce that amount, and we're talking about how only to reduce the amount on their electric bill, but also reduce the amount that they're paying when they go to the hospital, because they are breathing cleaner air due to the types of energy that we're using, that's another conversation that people are having. Same conversation, but just saying it in a different way that people can ingest. So again, talking to one another is an important part of this.
Yep, that is great. We also had a question, someone thanking you for the example from Spartanburg, South Carolina, and wanting to know if there are other examples of projects like that you can share.
Let's see. So there are a couple across different places. I'm in the Southeast, so most of the ones that I know of are going to be in the Southeast. There is a group that has done a lot of work in Florida around making sure that they're addressing sea level rise, but also addressing green gentrification. So green gentrification, if you're not familiar with it, it's when you have a particular community that has been fraught with maybe hurricane, tornado, flood, such that the insurance rates in that community go up. People are forced to move out or to be removed, but rich people can move in because they can pay for those premiums. At the same time, there's a cultural loss of the space and the land that people are really trying to protect. And so there are some really good stories in Florida and New Orleans of people being able to use resiliency dollars to protect the communities in which they live. It could be through seawall or through infrastructure, but being creative about protecting even the land, the insurance floor of the community, such that people can afford to remain there. They've taken those funds and leveraged them again with things like infrastructure dollars. And that'll be a big thing we see coming out of this administration. I really believe that. A way that cities, mayors can use infrastructure money for street, wastewater, sewer systems, et cetera, but to do it in a way that is resilient to climate. So utilizing new technology that they otherwise would not be able to afford to protect the community. Those are some really important spaces, and I think we're going to see more of it happen, especially in this administration.
Yeah, that's great. We do have a question about whether or not police brutality is an environmental justice issue. And also the question dovetails to how this all relates to some anti-protest bills that we have seen introduced around the country. We have several that are being considered in Ohio, and I know we are definitely not alone in the emergence of those pieces of legislation.
So I'm going to say yes, yes, and just yes. And if you give me a hot second, I'm going to share my screen here. Let me see. Let's see if I can make. Oh, here it is. Okay, I hope everyone can see this is the Upshot article, New York Times, a rise in murder. Let's talk about weather and the correlation between heat and crime in American cities. So I'm going to scroll down, and again, this is a great article. It's a piece that came out. It's a 2018 piece, and it has been updated in terms of the numbers, and it's not making me feel any better, I'll tell you that. But let's look here. This particular section has the rise in shooting victims on hotter days. And what it's showing is the average and the difference between the shooting victims on a cold day versus a hot day. You see the cold listed here on the graph, and it has some pretty much, you can tell our major cities here. You see Cincinnati is right here, right underneath of New Orleans in terms of the number of shootings. And this is not, this is everything, right? This is police brutality, domestic violence. This is everything. You can see it right here. I was really struck when, I'm going to scroll down, when they got to Chicago and showed that it was twice as likely when it's warm, twice as likely. And this, just thinking about what has happened recently in Chicago with the shooting of the 13-year-old by the police, when you're looking at some of these differences in northern cities versus southern cities, and give me a second here to sort of just lay this out. Southern cities where you have consistent heat patterns, people are pretty much used to the heat, you're used to the humidity, so it's normalized. Versus in northern cities where during the winter times, people tend to be inside versus outside when it gets a bit warmer, and there's an opportunity for more interaction, but also that hot weather is increasing people's anger or their irritability. So when we layer that on top of the fact that, I'm going to go to this next article, this is another piece that shows the decades of racist housing policies that literally leave neighborhoods hot. Okay, so now we're looking at the fact, this example is the 1930s red line in Richmond, Virginia. So this is where you can see in the 30s where you have specific areas
Heather, I think you just froze.
Etc. So you've got these two things layered on top of each other. The redlining, you got I will also share with you that these spaces are the most heavily policed. These are the most heavily policed parts of the community. And when we look at these, where you have the historic redlining on top of the heat maps, on top of where we have extreme or over policing, that's where we're coming to data that's showing us, again, how there is an interaction between climate, environmental justice, and police brutality. There's so many more layers that we can add on top of this. I'm gonna stop my share here. But you know, let's take that a step further, and let's talk about education. Let's talk about the upgrade some of the schools that are in these red line districts versus other communities. We have air conditioning in the schools. What about the community centers? What about the policing that continues to take place in these spaces? So we are basically have created areas based upon our own policies in this country that make Black and brown people more susceptible to not only environmental injustices, but certain violent actions. And I think that's really important for us to understand when we're thinking about the solutions to these.
Wow, that is the first time I have seen that information. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm glad you had it ready for us because I think it was really important to see.
And I can drop them in the chat too, Tracy, just, you know, if folks want to have an opportunity to go back and, you know, play around with some of the maps to look at some of these numbers, because it's again, it's important for us to have this type of conversation when we're talking about how do we create a solution. And we have to talk about this now because, again, money is getting ready to flow. Federal government is pushing out money. They're going to be pushing out monies to cities and towns. How do we spend it? Well, you are sitting in seats that can help advise how this is spent based upon what you know is happening within neighborhoods. So when you know that, okay, we've got neighborhoods where there is considerable over policing, where we know we have heat islands, now we can think about what are some innovative ideas. There's a great project, I'll see if I can pull it up real quick, called the White Roof Project. Well, the White Roof Project was simply a project to show that if you just take government buildings or buildings that have that are high-rise buildings and put a white roof on top of it, as opposed to that black tar roof that most of us know, then you can bring the temperature in the building down, reduce the electric costs of that building, and at the same time, make people a bit more comfortable simply by changing the roof. Now that innovation is out there. People are still looking at, okay, how does it work in different places? But something as simple as changing the roof color can help to reduce energy costs in places of high heat. But here's the thing that tickles me. Black and brown and indigenous people could have told you this a long time ago. We don't wear black when it's hot outside. The summertime is when you see beautiful white clothes. You know, my mama told me you can bring out your white, real white after Easter. And then Labor Day is when it goes put back up. I know these are old school traditional thoughts about attire, but there's some wisdom to that too. It's hot. And my mother would look at me like I was crazy if I was walking out of the house with a black, you know, sleeveless turtleneck on. Like, where are you going? You're going to pass out. So again, these are things that I think culturally some people have known for years. We just need to apply it in a way that helps larger communities reckon with what will help us achieve these goals quickly.
So I think you raise a lot of good points about, you know, some influx of resources that are coming and how people can get involved. But what would be your piece of advice for maybe somebody who's just entering into this field and they want to make a difference when it comes to climate change and environmental justice?
Yes, I say start where you are and where your interest is. We think of climate change and environmental work as one of the boxes, You know, there's social justice, there's police brutality, there's education, there's healthcare, there's climate, there's environment. Like, we think of it as one of these many boxes. And I push back against that. I think people should think instead that climate and environment is the table that all the boxes sit on. So everything has a foundation of environmental work and climate. So you pick where you are, what you have an interest in, and then we identify the climate lens of that as the space to work. It helps to keep us in focus, especially talking to young people who sort of think climate change is this big, huge thing. We're all gonna die. Oh no. To help sort of bring some focus and even hope to our solutions. If I think of it through the lens in which I work, it helps me to focus on what is my role here. I work in community engagement. That's my happy place, is talking to people and showing them how we need to collaborate and come and work together and the different ways that we can do that. I am not a scientist. I'm a lawyer, but I don't practice environmental law. That's not my sweet, happy place. I think it's important for us to find the place in which we enjoy and then go there. I was a mayor. I was grown before I realized that the work that I was doing was environmental work. I'm still doing the same type of work. It's just as an environmental lens and understands the floor now.
And I guess I'll just finish up with one question that I have for you. In reading over your bio and your experience, I would love to know from you, what has been your most meaningful experience, whether it's someone you've met, something you've done, a piece of advice you've been given. What is the one thing that really you will stick with you going into the future?
Boiling that down to one thing is really hard.
Okay, you get to.
I can put it in I guess in two ways. One is the recognition, and it goes along with my quote that I go by, and it's Winston Churchill: "When you're going through hell, keep going." I deeply identify with the fact that I am doing and in this work for a reason. And I cannot escape the fact that my ancestors, I am the living embodiment of a people who survived being moved from one ecosystem of plants, animals, germs, everything, and uprooted to another ecosystem, where they, even under the harshest of conditions, were able to teach people from an entirely different ecosystem how to grow, how to thrive, and we're still here. So personally, I take it very deeply that I have a responsibility for the very climate resiliency that runs through my blood and veins. I am the embodiment of what resiliency looks like, because the people that I come from had to be resilient in order to be here. And that to me is significant. And I see it through my faith. I see it as a symbol of hope, as the idea that there is a solution and an answer, and we have a responsibility to commit to that. And so that's my own, personal mantra. I think the other piece is my babies, my children. I had my first child when I was 40, and it's actually a hilarious joke. He's 4 now, getting ready to turn. He'll be 5 in the fall. But I was not aware that I could have children. I have 2 bonus babies, and when I got remarried, my husband and I were like, "Oh, we're fine," because I had so many challenges. And then all of a sudden, I was at EPA and popped up. I believe it was something in the water. And expecting my first child. Well, it was wonderful and beautiful to actually have this experience. And I was scared to death because I was pregnant during Zika, and I couldn't travel to some parts of the country in my official capacity. because of the impact of Zika, a vector-borne disease, on pregnant women and what it could possibly do to my son. I was breastfeeding during the Flint water crisis. And at the time, I was the only Black regional administrator. And so even from an environmental justice perspective, it was deeply resonating to me that there were mothers there who couldn't even feed their children from their own body if they wanted to because of the water. I remember talking to women who were farm workers in Florida, Latina, who could not hug their children when they came in from the flower farms because of the pesticides. And I knew in a different way, because I was a new mother, I knew in a different way what that meant and what that felt like to not be able to embrace your child. So, and that's why, you know, Mom's Clean Air Force was a natural fit for me when I came right out of the administration, is because giving birth to this human being and experiencing these very important environmental injustices that all of a sudden were placed upon me, it was overwhelming. And I said, okay, there's got to be something that can be done. There's clearly more to this than we are talking about or expressing. And I found that it was movement that could make a difference. There was something about listening to all of the things that my mothers and aunts and godmothers had said to me. It just all started sort of coming back. Tracy, I know you were around me, you've been around me a lot. So I come up with these isms like all the time. Y'all can tell I'm everything that I ever learned from a godmother or a grandmother or somebody, it just all comes out, right? Because those were the things that were very, very resonating, but that were healing. And so, you know, again, part of the work for me is to continue that, you know, to continue and to push that forward and to make sure that our children have all of the opportunities that are afforded to them and that they have access to them in an equal way.
Well, before I turn it over to Saronica Powell to close us out, I want to take a second to say thank you so much for giving us your time and your wisdom and your motivation. Obviously, you're one of my favorite people, so this is very heartfelt when I say thanks for being with us in Ohio, even if it was just for an hour. It was wonderful to hear from you, and we are all really grateful for you being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. And and I see some of the comments. Thank you all for being so kind. And I do hope to get up to see you all soon. I've taken my vaccines. I still mask. But I'm so excited about all of this work and the work that you're doing. Thank you just for being in the places where you sit.
Thank you. And Saronica, you want to close us out?
Sure. I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for joining us. And Tracy, thank you for moderating this for us. You did an excellent job. Ms. Toney, it goes without saying, your passion, just your knowledge, your leadership, it just shines right through because, I mean, you can tell that you're very passionate about the work you've done and the work that you continue to do. So we want to say thank you so much for spending this hour with us. And I also want to give a thank you to Jocelyn Travis and Chad Stevenson. Thank you for pulling this together for us and helping to just pull this team together. We are the Ohio Equity Team here in Ohio, and just the work that has been going on and the work that continues to go on. We're just so excited to bring others outside of Ohio into this with us because the fight doesn't just start and end here in Ohio, it goes across the nation. So thank you so much. We do have another series. This is just the first and many speaker series that we're doing. Our next one is May 20th, so please stay tuned for that information. We'll be sending that out to everyone. So just look out in your emails. Jocelyn, I want to give you an opportunity to say anything. If you would like to say anything as our fearful leader, please, by all means.
Fearful? No, I totally agree.
Fearless.
I'm so excited about today's session. It was a great way to kick us off. And I'm just excited. I'm excited about the future and us working together and just setting our foundation. I really want to let everybody know, though, I think, Veronica, we are going to be sending out evaluations, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And,
once we close out, an evaluation link will be sent out to everyone. Chad, our behind the scenes person that won't step on camera right now, he'll make sure that you all get that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So please let us know. And if you have any ideas on who you would like to see in the future, we've got some great people that we're looking at. We've contacted Mustafa Ali, Jackie Patterson, who we hope to confirm very shortly for some of our. So again, thanks to all of you for coming out today and supporting us. And thanks to our leadership team, the equity team.
So I'll end with a quote that Mayor Toney said, when you're going through hell, keep on going, because this fight is not over. So that was an awesome quote by William Churchill. So I really do. And it just speaks to just some of the battles that we are going through today. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you all on our next call. Have a good day.